Very good morning to you, Daniel Harris. How are you getting on?
Hello, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
This game against Burnley, occasionally, Burnley have been a thorn in the side of Manchester United. This season, though, this time and this team, this is the moment for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's group to separate themselves from all of the Manchester United teams that have come post-Ferguson and say, actually, you know what, we're real. So there's quite a lot on the line tonight.
Yeah, it's a really big game tonight. The opportunity to go top of the league almost halfway through the season. I think that Burnley give lots of teams trouble when they play well and the other teams don't play well. Last season, United went to Burnley, played really well and won quite comfortably. And if they play like that tonight, then you would expect them to win quite comfortably. But Burnley won't just allow them to get on with it and do it. And I think that Burnley will always kind of be associated with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer because they represent probably the nadir of his time in charge. United lost at home to Burnley just before Bruno started playing, and they've been pretty good ever since. But that home defeat was so bad, and that was really the time. I mean, not the time when people started to wonder, because people have been wondering since the beginning and are still wondering now. But that was pretty much as bad as it got, and since then, United have been steadily improving.
Yeah, I can see why if he wins tonight, Solskjaer will allow himself to think back on that defeat in front of crowd when you think about like what the atmosphere is like, the funereal sense, and really to plot his own journey from there to here is fairly remarkable. And you make the point that people are still wondering, do they stop wondering at any point, or does it require a league title before they stop going, actually, you know what, he does have it?
Maybe, and I mean, I think even now, if he won the league title now, people would be saying, well, yeah, lockdown, blah, blah, blah. I mean, ultimately, he probably isn't going to win the league title because there are probably a couple of better teams around. But the thing about that is you only have to play those couple of better teams 4 times. And if you can come out of those games with an all right record, then it ceases to be about that and becomes about what you can do against the rest. I think that United probably learned a few things from their game against City last week, which has some good aspects and some bad aspects. Obviously, the worst aspect is that they lost. And City, it was kind of in some ways quite immature performance from United in that they defended pretty well and yet still managed to concede 2 goals from set pieces. But I was also going forward that you saw when you play Pep Guardiola teams, you often, if you don't get an early goal and if they're playing well, you've got to be patient because you don't get a lot of the ball. And so when you do have the ball, sometimes I think that there's a pressure to force things because you're concerned about what happens when they get it back. They might score, and also when you're next going to get it back in a decent position. What happened was United managed to work some pretty decent situations, but instead of taking it one extra pass or waiting until the opportunity presented itself, they went for the killer balls and the shots too early, and they ended up not really creating that much. And I think it wasn't the pressure of playing in a big game exactly, because I don't think you could watch that game and say United didn't turn up. They did. They didn't play as well as City, but it wasn't a no-show. But the thing is that just at those crucial moments, they lacked a little bit of composure, and that hopefully will come. But I think that another way of looking at it will be to say, well, look at the doing they got at home by City at the same stage of the competition last season. They got taken apart, really. I think they were lucky to get away with, was it 3-1 they got away with in the end? And they were quite lucky to get away with that. Could have been a lot worse. Whereas this season, City played really well and United were in the game. And that's not an ultimate standard to be in the game against City. The ultimate standard is to wipe City and everyone else off the pitch. But you couldn't deny the improvement, and you couldn't deny also the improvement in mentality that when City played well, United didn't panic. They just, as I said, they just lacked that little bit of composure in the final third and making the right decisions. And I think one of the things about that was slightly concerning was that it was a bit of a frustrated, tired performance from Bruno Fernandes, who I was surprised to see on the bench at the weekend. Well, not exactly surprised, but I'd hoped that he would just have been sitting at home, because ultimately it's not just about the physical tiredness for a footballer or for any sportsman or for any person who has to go to work, really. It's about mental tiredness, and his performance suggested someone who was just pushed one game too far. And it wasn't just that he couldn't run, it was just that mentally he seemed to be making the wrong decisions, he seemed to be frustrated. He's had a week off now, but in an ideal world, Ole trusts the players that he has enough to not have to play him tonight either, but I'm absolutely certain he'll play him tonight.
Cavani's had a bit of time off as well. Should he play tonight?
Yeah, I think so. I think the only reason you might not see that much of Cavani tonight is that I think he'll be required on Sunday against Liverpool. Because although Anthony Martial is more likely to create a goal out of nothing, I'm pretty sure that Ole will not want a chance falling to Martial. He'll want it falling to Cavani in a situation where its possible chances might be at a premium. And also, one of the things I was talking to a friend about the game yesterday, and one of the things that I thought about also was that when you have defenders when you have young defenders, and Liverpool, they're going to have Fabinho and they're going to have young defenders, I think they're going to be all right with pace because Fabinho can run, and whoever the young defender is, they're going to be able to run. Whereas Cavani doesn't quite have the same pace that Martial has, but he does have the nous. And when you're playing against a young centre-back, say, and a centre-back who's not really a centre-back but is good at being a centre-back, someone who is constant movement and clever runs and 2 and 3 runs every attack is perhaps harder to deal with. And it actually reminded me of when United used to play Arsenal, when both teams were good. It seems like a lifetime ago. But still, 2019 seems like about 10 years ago, never mind 2003 or whatever. But Alex Ferguson used to quite like playing Ryan Giggs on the right against Ashley Cole because Ashley Cole could match Ronaldo for pace, and he was good enough to have the recovery pace to get back at him when he got beat. But he struggled a bit more with Ryan Giggs, whose movement was a bit clever and whose passing was a bit cleverer. And that's why I'd expect to see Cavani start against Liverpool. I think he'll probably start tonight as well. I wouldn't expect 90 minutes out of him, but I think he'll start both games.
When it comes to Edinson Cavani and what he actually brings off the pitch as well, how much are you reading into that? The fact that they have people who are used to winning titles in the dressing room. You look at him, you look at Matic, you look at Juan Mata. This is going to be kind of important if this title race is to be sustained.
Yeah, I think so. It's not just with Cavani and with all the older players. It's not just about players who know how to win, although that's important. It's about knowing how to prepare. It's about knowing how to train, and it's about influencing the other players to become better. Whether it's just with the habits that they see, in terms of thinking about the game, in terms of practice, in terms of how you live your life, but also in terms of the kind of movements that you make. Because what United have is they have Martial, Rashford, and Greenwood, who are 3 really interesting and talented forwards. But none of them quite make a centre forwards runs. You don't see many tap-ins out of them. You see plenty of goals from all of them, although Martial and Greenwood have struggled a little bit this season. But you see a lot of really good goals. You don't see them getting a lot of free goals, and I think that is something that all of them can learn off Cavani. When you should be running front post, when you should be running back post, when you should be following in. I mean, you should be following in all the time, and you should be running front post almost all the time because that's where you get your goals. I mean, Fergie was very keen on that, telling Mark Hughes that you get your goals at the front post. But I think that there's also those aspects in how player position that I'm sure there's plenty to learn off Cavani if people got their eyes and their ears open.
We were kind of debating the point last week in the aftermath of the Manchester City game that you mentioned there about the importance of trophies in this journey for Manchester United. Where do you stand on that, on the importance of what, say, an FA Cup at this point would actually bring to the club this season?
Any kind of trophy would be huge. I mean, football as a supporter and as a player, I'm sure, like football it's about those moments. It's about those transcendental moments that you remember for the rest of your life, where there's a particular buzz and excitement, and you don't get that from finishing 4th. It was really important for United to finish 4th last season, and I understand why Solskjaer prioritised that above the FA Cup. I mean, bottom line, he's probably told he had to by his bosses, but in any event, I wanted United to try and win the Cup, but I totally understand why they didn't, because even if you forget about the money, in order to take the club to the next level, you have to be seen to be progressing in the league. You have to be competing in the Champions League. And although United aren't in it anymore, the experience they got in the Champions League this season will help them develop, and they produced a couple of really excellent Champions League performances. So you do need to do that, but the days that people remember will be the days that you won trophies. And it also, when you win a trophy, it tells the players that they can win. I mean, Gary Neville has always said that the League Cup United won in 2006 was important it was a staging post for that third Fergie great team, because they realised that they could win. And obviously United haven't done that yet. And generally, teams before they win leagues will win a cup or have a season where they go close in the league. It's unusual for a team just to come out of nowhere and win the league. I mean, Leeds did it in '92, but other than that, I can't think of too many occasions where that happened. I guess Leicester. But United need to try and find a way. And it's easy to say, well, they've lost all these semi-finals and say, well, therefore they're bottling on the big occasion. But I don't think it's right to look at those 4 games as a block particularly, because each of them was different. United lost the semi-final to City, and that was before Bruno, and they came within a late goal of actually taking that to penalties. So there was that. And then the next semi-final, there was they had the Chelsea semi-final in the cup, and by the time that semi-final came along, the players were shattered, and he rested a few players for that game. So, and it clearly wasn't a priority. The semi-final against Sevilla was actually, for an hour, was like up there with United's best performances under Ole. And the aspects that caused them to lose that are the reasons why they're losing semi-finals. And I don't think it's because they're bottling them and not turning up. I think it's because they're not ruthless enough going forward. The finishing isn't good enough, and at the back they're not reliable. Like the two ends of the pitch don't quite get the other one out of trouble when they're playing a good team. It's okay when you're playing West Ham and you go a goal down and then you bring on Rashford and Fernandes and you can come back. But it's different when you're playing Sevilla or when you're playing Manchester City. And in those games, you get punished for your mistakes. So you can't get away with missing chances or wasting good attacking situations. And you can't get away with it in particular if you can't be trusted to keep a clean sheet. And that is ultimately the problem with this United team, and something that needs to be resolved. They're capable of playing some really, really good football, scoring some lovely goals, and sometimes defending well. But when they face the better teams, the finishing isn't ruthless enough. You can't get away with wasting 3 or 4 good chances before you score, or after you score, before you score the second goal, which is what happened against Sevilla. And the defending against Sevilla, they gave Sevilla 2 goals that they really didn't need to. And it's about getting more ruthless at both ends of the pitch. It's not, I don't think, about not turning up, because I would say that it wasn't. You could say they didn't turn up against Chelsea. I don't want it to feel like I'm making excuses for them. But when I look at the semi-finals and you take each of them individually, each of them has a slightly different story. But the thing really that links them is impreciseness in defence and attack.
Yeah, but in some aspects, it's the same story the whole way along. They're just not quite good enough yet to be winning those games. And this season, for the last 5 or 6 weeks, it looks like they have everybody who they need to be fit. There is a style and a system that is evolving. There are partnerships that are becoming more bedded in. This is the bit now. From now until the end of the season, we'll be able to judge this Solskjaer team, and it's essentially his team. Like there's no, it's no longer the Mourinho team, and we'll see what happens with Pogba, notwithstanding. But these next 5 months are going to tell us the truth about Solskjaer's ability to get good performances in big games from this team.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, I think that they still need a couple of players, and I don't think that if you just look at their team and you forget about who the manager is, I mean, you would still look at that team and think it needs a defensive midfield player, it might need a centre forward, don't have a right winger, and those are still things that are required to make this team better. It doesn't look like anything's going to happen in this transfer window, but you wouldn't say that this is a team that is absolutely ready. And it's a team that is improving. It's a team that can play really well, but it's not a team that's quite there yet. And when you look at the team, the reason why you keep seeing different midfields for different fixtures is because the balance isn't quite right. Because what you've got is at the front of the team, you don't have any wingers. You've got wide attackers, and Liverpool do that. They play wide attackers who need to score goals. United don't really have a right winger at all, but they have wide attackers. But the way that Liverpool offset what you lose from wide attackers is that the fullbacks supply the width, and the way that they get around fullbacks who stay high and wide and supply the width is they don't have a lot of creativity in midfield. They've just got mainly they've got good players, but 3 athletes, which is why Klopp tried to buy Fekir, why he's bought Thiago, to give them a little bit of guile. What United have is they don't have the fullbacks that allow for those wide attackers, and they also don't quite have the midfield. So what you get in midfield is you always have Bruno, obviously, but if you play with a number 10, which is more or less how Bruno plays, who doesn't have a lot of defensive responsibility, to balance that, you sort of need 2 runners. So in the big games, it's usually Fred and McTominay. Except if you play with Fred and McTominay, then you're saying that almost all the creation has to come from Bruno. So if Bruno doesn't have a good game, or if the opposition put 2 men on Bruno or stop Bruno, struggling to create. And the balance of that isn't quite right, because what you've then got behind it is you've got a defence that isn't quite reliable. So that's the other reason why you see Fred and McTominay playing a lot of the big games. And so it does still need some tweaks. And I mean, it needs one more midfield player. I think an upgrade on Fred and McTominay. if Pogba leaves, it may even need another one, depending on what the plan is for Van de Beek. Not sure. So, as a long answer to the question, that we will learn a lot about Solskjaer from the next 4 or 5 months, because you learn a lot about any manager in that time. But I don't think this team is quite ready yet. But it's not inconceivable that they would manage to pull off something good before they were quite ready.
Yeah, and I get why the downplaying of chances is happening from a Manchester United perspective, but surely you won't be in this sort of form this time next week if they've just beaten Burnley, if they've not got beaten by Liverpool, got 4 points from the next 2 games. Surely at that point your tone has changed a little bit and you're saying this thing has a real chance of happening.
I mean, it has a chance of happening now. Obviously, if they win the next 2 games, it'll have more chance of happening because they'll have 6 more points. But it won't change what I think about this team and where I think this team has it in its stage of development. Like nothing, I don't think I can see anything in the next week that's going to make me reevaluate my opinions about Fred and McTominay, who I think are useful players. But I think that in order to get to a team that starts winning the big trophies, you probably need someone slightly better than both of them, at least one player slightly better than both of them. And I'm not going to change my opinion about that. But if United do get 6 more points, and they would be in a position where they had good momentum, and they are good enough to get enough points in the remainder of their games to go close to winning the league title. But they're probably not as good as Liverpool and Man City. And to win the league when there are 2 teams who seem to be better, it's unusual. But it's probably not unprecedented, because ultimately, when a team wins a league, obviously the best team wins the league, because the league is a metric to measure which team has played best in the league that season. And so you wouldn't say at that point that the 2 teams that were better than them had played better than them in the league that season, but you might say that Liverpool and City have a better top level than United do, even at that point. So it might happen, and if they win the next 2 games, it will be more likely to happen. But no one is not gonna convince anyone that this United team is quite there yet and suddenly doesn't need the key players that Liverpool and City don't quite need. Because it's interesting with City, actually, because I don't think that this team is as good as the team that won the consecutive league titles, but they might be more dangerous in some ways, and certainly more dangerous in Europe, because if you put the players that they have going forward in front of a defence just behaving in a sensible manner, then you have a team that looks to me to be more likely to win the big games against the best teams. So if City now look like they've got a bit of momentum too, and they know what it takes. So I think that Jurgen Klopp will be starting to be concerned, and he'll be much more concerned about City than he'll be concerned about United.
For sure. One story that we just wanted to get your take on, see exactly. Roy Keane has been linked with, or it has been reported that he's interested in getting back into the day-to-day of football management. He had previously been linked with the Azerbaijan job, then Azerbaijan ended up in Ireland's group. So we're all very, we're disappointed maybe that didn't happen. Where in the league would Keane realistically be considered for a manager's gig? What level at the moment do you think?
I'm not sure. I think that people, to some extent, I don't know if they underestimate Roy Keane as a manager, but most managers fail in most jobs that they take. And almost every manager gets fired from the jobs that they take. And Keane had showed some potential. I think people forget what a good job he did at Sunderland, where he took them from, I think, they're in the bottom 3 of the Championship.
Yeah.
And he took them from the bottom 3 of the Championship to a Premier League team. And a lot of that, I'm told, was because by people who I know who watch Sunderland, a lot of that was clearly because of the stuff that Keane was doing. There's become this desire to do him up as a proper football man who doesn't believe in coaching and doesn't believe in tactics. And I don't really think that's true. Like, do you remember early in the season on Sky, he had like a row with Tim Cahill, where Tim Cahill was saying that Arsenal knew why they were losing, so it was all right while they were losing, and United were a mess. And then obviously we saw what happened after that. And Keane was talking much more about talent and mentality. And I think that he's right about that. I think the problem with Roy Keane is perhaps the problem with Jose Mourinho also, is that he doesn't tolerate particular kinds of personality and traits. And when you're managing a team, you have to tolerate all the people that you have who might be able to be good for you and you might be able to get something out of. And I'm not sure that Roy Keane has necessarily worked out how to speak to everyone all of the time. Like his media reputation, and in fairness, like the reputation that he plays up to, almost as a pastiche of himself. I mean, there's a book, Bret Easton Ellis writes a book called Luna Park, and it begins with a line, "You do a very good impression of yourself." And I often think about that when I watch Roy Keane on television. You do a very good impression of yourself. But I think he's in on that particular joke, but I don't think it does a lot for his reputation and for if he wants to get back into management, for that bid to get back into management. But what he needs to do is he needs to develop a way of talking to different kinds of personality, because when you've got a football team, it's rare for you to have a particular kind of personality that is dominant. Mourinho had it at Chelsea the first time, but he hasn't had it really at any club since Inter, and I think that's why he struggled. And if Roy Keane can somehow assimilate that not everyone is like him and not everyone is like anything, then he might have the nous and the ability to inspire. Because whatever people say, when you talk to people that know him personally, they'll tell you that Roy Keane is a top bloke and he is kind. Not all the time. There'll be just as many stories of him winding people up, not winding people up, but him treating people in a way that, if you're trying to get a tune out of them, is unwise, is often unwise. But when I hear him talk about football, I still look at him and I think you have the capacity to be inspirational. The question is whether he's learning, and people tend not to change that much. So he might need a particular circumstance to be successful, but I wouldn't say it's impossible for him to be successful.
Are you talking about a championship club, or actually should he stop thinking about that and only ever try and get a big club where the players are going to respect the fact that he's asking them to have the mentality of winners?
I don't think it would. It doesn't matter necessarily. I mean, I think he's shown that he has the ability to do a good job in the Championship, because he did one. But I think him persuading someone to give him a job in the Premier League at this point seems quite unlikely. So it might have to be a Championship club. But where you get a set of personalities who respond to Roy Keane in the right way, you don't know where that's going to happen, or where he would have the freedom and the money to be able to assemble what he needs. I mean, if he even knows what he needs. I mean, he when you watch him on telly, you can see that he has some self-knowledge. So he does probably know what he's after. But managing is hard, and as I said, most managers fail in most jobs. So I wouldn't. Maybe he needs to be with someone else, or with someone who can be the good cop to his bad cop, or with someone who's a good coach. Hard to know what kind of coach he is. I think that when he was at Sunderland, I think people felt that his game management was quite good and his coaching of players from the touchline was good. But management is such an enormous, sprawling job, and it's hard to speak with like huge expertise about what Roy Keane does, because we don't know.
Yeah. But
he did do a great job at Sunderland that time.
All right, Daniel, good stuff. Thanks a million. Cheers.
No, I see you again, lads.
Daniel Harris, give us some thoughts on Man United Burnley tonight. We'll obviously be talking about that on tomorrow's show as well. 087 180 180 if you've got thoughts on where Roy Keane could end up as a manager, or indeed if Manchester United are going to win tonight.